1075, the Patriot Channel. I'm Matt Boyle, our Washington political editor. Number here, 866-95-PATRIOT, 866-957-2874, Sirius XM 125, the Patriot Channel. So I can confirm from sources with the Vice President's team that everybody's okay on the Vice President's team after the little mishap with the plane earlier this evening in New Hampshire. They apparently hit a bird on their way out, and they had to turn back around on Air Force Two, and then the Vice President and his team, his staff, this is why we had to reschedule with Mark Short, his chief of staff, had to take a military jet that's usually used for transporting stuff back to Joint Base Andrews. They've just arrived back at Andrews. Everybody's A-okay. And we're glad to hear that, so that everybody made it home okay. So, very, very positive development there. Okay, so we got another very special guest on the line here, Bill Hagerty. He's the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate in the great state of Tennessee. He's also a former U.S. ambassador to Japan for the Trump administration. If elected to the U.S. Senate, I believe he would be the first Trump administration official elected to the United States Senate. Ambassador Hagerty, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us here on Breitbart News Tonight.
Thank you, Matt. And that's a great observation about being the first member of the Trump administration to join the Senate. President Trump reminded me on a number of occasions that I'm the only member of his administration he's endorsed for the United States Senate.
Yes, that's exactly true. And so you're now the nominee. I don't think I've had you on since the election because things have just been crazy as well the last couple 6 weeks or so. Just one thing after another. Now the latest thing, Ambassador, is that we've got a vacancy on the U.S. Supreme Court. So Justice Ginsburg passed away on Friday night, and President Trump is going to be nominating a replacement after a funeral upcoming on Saturday, 5 p.m. at the White House. What are you looking for in a justice to replace Justice Ginsburg? What are the qualities that you think need to be in a Supreme Court justice?
Well, I think the most critical aspect for a Supreme Court justice is that they be a constitutionalist justice, not one that will make up the law, not one that will legislate from the bench, not one that will try to backdoor liberal policies through judicial rulings rather than through legislation. That is the first and foremost criteria. I mean, there is a lot that will need to be examined, that has been examined on the list of candidates that President Trump has put forward in terms of their legal scholarship, their intelligence, their grit, their character. All of that is terribly important, but I think that first and foremost, and I know that's the focus that President Trump has, is putting a constitutionalist justice on the bench. And I'd say this, President Trump, I think, thought it was a brilliant move back in 2016 when he laid out the list of potential justices so the American public could look at those, could vet those, and know that that was the list that President Trump would choose from. And we could see the caliber of jurisprudence that we could anticipate on the United States Supreme Court to the extent President Trump would be nominating new justices. It was obvious at that point he would have at least one to do. And that was Neil Gorsuch, which actually began before the president was inaugurated. Don McGahn initiated that process early on during the transition. But I think, you've seen the president add to this now. What we have not seen, and in fact what we have seen is a refusal from Joe Biden to disclose who he might appoint. I think that tells us all we need to know. That Biden would be looking for liberal justices, those that would legislate from the bench and try to backdoor liberal policies. That's been the Democrats' workaround. When they can't get their liberal policies through in legislation, they rely on the courts. President Trump is bringing that to an end, and I look forward to serving the United States Senate to support putting constitutionalists on the bench.
Yeah, so now, on that note of Biden refusing to release a list, apparently a few months ago he was saying that he would release a list, and now he's saying that he won't. I find that offensive that he won't tell us. Look, I'm obviously a conservative. I definitely intend to support President Trump. I'm very open about that as a journalist. I wish other people in the media would do the same. But the point is that at the same time, Joe Biden is running for president of the United States. He is the candidate of a major political party. I think that he owes it to the voters, he owes it to the public to release a list of people that he would consider to nominate for the United States Supreme Court. And President Trump, to his credit, did that, and he's stuck to that list. He has not deviated from that list when it came to Supreme Court justices. Neil Gorsuch came from the list, Brett Kavanaugh came from the list, and now the selections, the finalist candidates that we're hearing about through media reports are each on the list, right? So we know we can trust President Trump on this, but Joe Biden we cannot trust because he won't tell us.
I think it's part and parcel of his entire posture. Matt, if you think about Joe Biden, the fact that he talks about having a list, he's just not going to share it with the American public, just as he's not shared so many things. About his past, about his financial ties to China, for example. You think about his policies. There's been a dramatic shift from the Joe Biden that legislated in the United States Senate to the Joe Biden that presents himself today as a candidate. And, you've got to wonder who's pulling the strings on all of this. Joe Biden might not even be able to defend the candidates that are on his list. So it is unfortunate. I agree with you. It's something that as a citizen, certainly from your perspective as a journalist, it's offensive. But that's the posture that the Democrats are going to take. And I think if you just look back to their convention, Matt, their posture on this election is just to try to make the American public hate Donald Trump. That's their focus. It's that type of drive and that type of strategy, I think, is going to fail them miserably. And I'm not looking forward to the upcoming discussions around the confirmation, the advice and consent process in the Senate, based on what we saw happen and what we've seen happen, since this began back with Clarence Thomas. Gorsuch, rough road, and certainly the situation with Brett Kavanaugh, extremely embarrassing to America to see what the Democrats are willing to do. I am certain as President Trump is interviewing candidates, he's not only looking for their strength as a jurist, he's looking for their strength as an individual to withstand the sort of attacks that are certain to come their way.
Yeah, so speaking of that, the Democrats are already out there making really egregious threats. Nancy Pelosi won't rule out impeaching Trump again, which didn't work out so well for them the first time. But she's opening the door to that. You've got other ones talking about packing the courts. I think Joe Kennedy is talking about that, and Jerry Nadler's talking about that. Then you've got other Democrats saying that nothing's off the table if Trump goes forward with this. They've again suggesting packing court packing, the nuclear option in the Senate, which I mean arguably maybe needs to go. I don't know. That's a whole separate discussion for a different day. But to do it out of like an emotional rage rather than a logical decision just doesn't make any sense. There's other people out there among the left and the media talking about rioting and looting and burning stuff down if Trump moves forward with this. We've seen people out there in the left and the media do that. The Democrats haven't denounced that at all. So what are your thoughts on how the left, especially after the horrendous treatment and behavior of the Democrats during the Justice Kavanaugh confirmation hearings? What are your thoughts on what to expect from the other side here as this process moves forward?
Well, Matt, as you just made that description, there was one word choice that really stuck with me, and that was the use of the word rage. And rage seems to be driving the Democrat Party. They seem to think that motivates their base. I think what's happening, certainly happening here in Tennessee, is their base is eroding. Not only am I reaching out to independents, but Democrats who are looking at what the offer is from their national party. Defunding, dismantling the police, chaos, rioting, as you say, they won't denounce it. This is really turning, traditional Democrats off as well. And I think this is going to inure to the benefit of President Trump in the 2020 election. It certainly is something that the Democrats, I think, have gone tone deaf on. And this has been nothing but an outpouring of rage. Frankly, it's been the case for almost 4 years, ever since President Trump won the election. And that is not an organizing principle that Americans are going to bond to. I really don't think that's the American way. And their focus seems to be to try to, incite anger and rage, as you say, to be incendiary at every turn. And certainly that's getting the media time, press time. The more incendiary, the better. That drives clicks, that drives, excitement in the media. But I don't think that drives the American public and the American voter. I think, frankly, as I travel all across the state of Tennessee, which is a big state, we have so many people that are turned off by this, so many people that are deeply concerned that America is going to be pushed off the cliff into socialism by these Marxists that have completely hijacked the Democrat Party. I really think that they are overplaying their hand in this case, and it's going to backfire on them, just like it did with an impeachment, just like it did with Kavanaugh.
Yeah. So speaking of Kavanaugh and the political effects of that, I remember I covered this race very closely with your future colleague Senator Blackburn, who I know supported you aggressively during the primary and is supporting you now in the general election. She was down in the polls in some cases against Democrat Phil Bredesen in Tennessee, and it was a tight race. Now, I don't think that Kavanaugh was the only reason why she won, but because of the behavior of the Democrats there, among many, many other reasons, I think Senator Blackburn closed the gap, and she ended up blowing him away. I think it was a double-digit victory in Tennessee. And now, in the case of your opponent here, again, your opponent this cycle is a pretty radical Democrat. I mean, even much more radical than Phil Bredesen. So if people were scared about Phil Bredesen, what he would do if he got in the Senate, imagine what Marquita Bradshaw would do. She's a radical environmentalist leftist. Tell us about your thoughts on how this fits into the broader question of the Tennessee Senate race, because I know it's a red state and President Trump's at the top of the ticket this time, but we don't want to take anything for granted here. And I know you're working hard all the way through Election Day. So tell us how this fits into the bigger picture here.
Well, I certainly am not taking anything for granted. When President Trump and I talked about me becoming a candidate, this is the first time I've ever run for political office. They told me to run like I'm 1 point behind. And I said, Mr. President, I'm going to run like I'm 10 points behind every day. He said, that's the type of dedication that's going to make you a winner. And that's certainly how we approached our primary, heads down, execution-oriented. We won with double digits in the primary, too, and I got a majority of the vote here in Tennessee. And that's not easy to do when you have 15 people on the ballot in the Republican primary. But we delivered on that. And again, I'm not taking anything for granted in the general election either. I'm moving out in a very deliberate fashion. We've got a great team and a solid plan. The environment's changing. It changed on us during the primary with the pandemic, the economic shutdown, and all that's associated with that. Now you think about the environment, the political environment. We've got an open Supreme Court seat that's coming through, and that's got to be addressed and dealt with as well. So we're going to be agile. We're going to actually, 42 days from now, I'm confident that we're going to deliver, because Tennessee values are conservative values, and at the end of the day, that's going to carry the day. I just need to be able to communicate that message. So we're not going to take anything for granted, but delivering our conservative message will deliver the values that Tennessee wants to see in the United States Senate.
And Ambassador Hagerty, the last thing I want to talk to you about, but certainly not least, so we heard President Trump at the UN General Assembly earlier today talking about China and how we need to hold them accountable for the pandemic, as you mentioned there. I mean, it really destroyed our economy. We're rebuilding now, but it obviously had a major public health impact on the United States too. We just crossed 200,000 deaths here in the United States and millions of cases. So I know this is an issue that's near and dear to you. We talked about it a lot during the primary, that you worked on this on the front lines there on the Pacific Rim as ambassador to Japan. What is your advice? First of all, what do you think about the president's speech today to the UN General Assembly? What do you think we need to do? What steps do you intend to take when you get there to the U.S. Senate to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for what they did here?
Well, China's aggression is well known around the world. And as President Trump made that speech in the United Nations, I thought he is again saying what I know many people think but are afraid to say. And among the diplomatic corps at the UN, it's full of that sort of behavior where they won't say what they know is true. And when President Trump does speak the truth, it makes them quite uncomfortable. But this is the type of discomfort that needs to take place, because China absolutely should be held accountable for the carnage that they caused, not only to America, but to the global economy, to the incredible loss of lives. As you mentioned, we've crossed 200,000 lives here in America, and it is something that is unforgivable. If you think about what China was doing, they were denying the transmission of this virus person to person, and the World Health Organization, complicit in all of this too. At the time, they knew that was false. They locked down domestic air travel, even though they allowed international travel to continue from Wuhan. They protected their own cities, but they didn't protect the folks around the world. Those flights were flying in Italy. Those flights were flying into North America. We know what happened, and we know who was responsible for that. That's China. The fact that the president is speaking it again makes diplomats uncomfortable, but that's exactly the type of forthright posture that we need to take as America. And as you mentioned, I was on the front lines there in Japan. Japan is the cornerstone of our entire strategy in the Asia Pacific. That's where we deal with North Korea, Russia, China from that point, because we have more military stationed in Japan than any place else in the world outside the United States. An important position to be there as a senior American. And I've seen China's aggression from a military standpoint, what they're doing in the South China Sea and the East China Sea every day. I've seen it from a diplomatic standpoint, as have you and the rest of the world. Look at what they've done in the World Health Organization. They essentially control it. And then their economic aggression. They steal intellectual property. They deeply subsidize strategic industries, making very unfair competition for our companies that have to compete under market dynamics. And if you want to do business in China, you've got to take on a Chinese partner. You've got to transfer your technology to them. Extraordinarily unfair trading terms. We have to stand up to them. They're too big of an economy to ignore. They're the second largest economy in the world after the United States. We've got to stand up to them. They need to change their behavior. We need to be able to deal with that economy and that population on much more reasonable terms.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the Italy thing too, because the flights that were coming out of China, they blocked down their domestic travel. Italy was the first country in Europe to really get hit with this whole thing. And it's worth mentioning that about a little over a year ago now, back in May 2019, Italy became the first Western major country to join the Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese Communist Party, and with that came a whole bunch of people that were workers that moved from Wuhan to Italy, to northern Italy, and that's where the virus first hit in Italy. And what had happened is that all these people had gone home for Chinese New Year back to Wuhan, and then they left on flights, and China didn't stop them. They could have stopped them from leaving Wuhan as they were stopping them from going elsewhere in China, but they let them go back to Italy, and they let the virus get there. So when people like Andrew Cuomo come out and say that it's Europe and not China, and they come try to play politics with Trump, that's that's the point there. Ambassador Hagerty, really want to thank you for joining us here tonight. Where can people go to learn more about you and get involved in the campaign if they so choose?
It would be wonderful if they would. Please go to www.teamhagerty.com. You can also follow us on social media. Bill Hagerty, TN for Tennessee, on all social media. But it's 42 days away from Election Day. We're taking nothing for granted. We've got the Democrats moving all over the United States on open seats and seats that are competitive. I've got 42 days to go. We're going to put everything on the field, and I hope that folks listening will dial in, tune in, and support our effort. We've got a long way to go, but I'm very, very well positioned, and I appreciate your listeners taking time to go learn more.
All right, well, that's Ambassador Bill Hagerty. He's the Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate in the great state of Tennessee. We'll have him back again soon, and he will be a senator, I'm pretty sure, soon. So, again, folks, Breitbart News.